So I'm very pleased to welcome all of you, and people still come in. My name is Felicitas. I'm head of the project Paradigm Shift, which is here at Technical University Berlin at the Institute of Urban and Regional Planning, and we are very pleased to put together this 21st NUPS webinar, international webinar, with Maurizio Ambrosini, who's in Milan. Hi, Maurizio. And we just thought we would like to speak about a topic which is a bit overseen at the moment, and that is the one of remittances, which is a side of migration governance we don't look at very often. So I'm very pleased that about 100 people have registered for the webinar, and I'm excited. We have wonderful speakers, and I will give you a little introduction into the topic, and then Maurizio will speak also. And then we start with our speakers. I have to apologize. One of our speakers is ill with the flu, and he's in bed, so he will not join us. That is Christian Ambrosius. I just right ahead start with this. All of you, and NUPS International Webinar Series. It's a webinar series which tackles entangled issues of migration in an internationally comparative perspective. Oh, is it where it's there? Okay, in an internationally comparative perspective. What we wanted to is to highlight the chances of long-term oriented proactive migration governance, so what can be done. So it's looking on policy making pretty strongly. We want to offer food for thought through international comparison, and we are engaged, or we bring in the most relevant researchers in the field, experts. How do we do that? We have short pitches focusing on main arguments by experts in the field. We give an overview over the current discussion rather than a deep dive. And we normally have 6 to 8 speakers, today 7 speakers, who will give us insights into the salient points of the debate for about 6 to 8 minutes. We then have time for the discussion. The discussion is without recording, the rest is recorded, and you can follow us on our NUPS YouTube channel and see what we have done so far. So I'm very pleased to introduce you into the content. What can you expect? Why remittances? We think there are many aspects of international migration which are overlooked, which have to be seen more because they make part of international migration governance, and remittances is such a topic. So that has been the largest source of external finance for many low and middle income countries for the last years, other than China. And I mean, remittances are private funds, so they cannot replace public spending, and the remittances to low and middle income countries have surpassed the volume talk about that much more and much better. And Dilip will speak about it. I just brought together the main receiving countries, which you can see here, the blue columns here, which is India, Mexico, Philippines, France, China. But even more interesting is which are the countries from where remittances are sent, and that is the United States, it's Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, Germany. It's already at the 4th place. I do not know about Italy, but Italy is having a very strong connection to all places in the world, and Maurizio will speak about that. So we thought that is exciting to see that. So we will have the first 3 presentations on the dynamics of international remittances. What are we speaking about? We all know somewhat by heart that the money sent home helps to support the elder ones, for example, the children. They help to finance their education, for example, or sick family members. We know that. What we know much less is that we see innovative forms of remittances. So money and goods which are not sent by individuals but by group associations, religious communities, defined as collective remittances. And we will listen to that. And Italy, as my colleague Ferruccio Pastore said, is some sort of a testing ground for all migration governance and migration. So I'm very happy we can collaborate here with our Italian colleagues. We have always a major critique on the role of remittances, which is that they create new dependencies. And we invited one speaker to speak about such dependencies, and that they are mainly used to finance consumption instead of creating jobs and local development. Also, I didn't know before when I was preparing this webinar that there are very high fees. On average, 5.8% of the sum transmitted is to be paid in the form of fees. And if you recall that the SDGs foresee 3% of fee as a threshold, you can read that in goal 10.c, to reduce to less than 3 points the transaction cost of migrant remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. You can see the urgency of the topic also here. So the reduction of inequalities among countries is a major feature within the SDGs. And so we should keep in mind this geopolitical dimension. We should keep in mind the micro perspective. And so our webinar focuses first on the dimensions of current flows of remittances and then sheds light on the innovative usages we see. Here, our focus is on Italy, and we want to highlight the pitfalls that go along with the sending of remittances, especially so in the moment of global shocks. As I told you, one of our speakers is at bad with the flu, so we cannot listen to Christian Ambrosius, but we have many other speakers. I want to show you who is speaking and then hand over to Mauritius. Our speakers are Dilip Ratha from the formerly World Bank or still World Bank in Washington, and one of the most outstanding experts when it comes to migration dynamics and remittances. We have Deepali Fernandes. She's in India at the moment, and for evening, and she's specializing in policy development and for AfCFTA, Actors Platform on Migration and Development, focusing a bit more on the role of diasporas, which are of increasing importance for all migration governance. Ich nehme die Präsentation raus. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I just hear that you cannot hear me. Better now? Okay, so welcome to everybody. We have, I was saying who's here, it's Dilip Ratha, it's Deepali Fernandes, it's Paddy Siyanga Knudsen, Professor Simone Baglioni, Brunella Casalini, Valentina Marconi, Lekh, Nath, Paudel, and we have two participants who are one is in India, one is in Nepal, so please apologize. And we are in Berlin, so apologize for the bad connection sometimes. We are at the Technical University, it's not perfect. And I want to hand over with this to Maurizio Ambrosini. Please, Maurizio.
Can I share?
Yeah, it's open.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I try.
Yeah,
again.
we can see it. We can see it.
You can see. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for this invitation, Professor Hillman. I'm here with some colleagues. We are involved in a national project of the Italian Ministry of Research and University on migrant remittances. And the presentations of my colleagues will highlight several dimensions of remittances. I just briefly mentioned some of the goals and the meanings of remittances. First of all, economic remittances are the main link connecting transnational families. They have been defined a currency of care. They are a way to demonstrate love, affection, attention, care for people in the homeland. And they are a bridge connecting emigrants with their distant families and communities. Moreover, remittances can acquire multiple meanings. There are studies on the meaning of money. What money does it mean? And the same can be said for remittances. They can work as a compensation for the absence of emigrants. So they are a way to compensate, for instance, grandmothers who take care of children of immigrants who are abroad, or they can compensate a sister who takes care of the old parents of migrants. In various ways, remittances are a way to display gratitude towards people who are involved in substituting, replacing migrants in their role inside their families. Second, they can have the meaning of a moral obligation when children send money to take care of their parents, and especially male children are morally obliged to take care of their old parents in the homeland. Or remittances can work as a gift. And gifts, as a long anthropological tradition show, can express the continuity of bonds with a community, can express belonging to a community of people, can take alive the links between immigrants, their extended family, and their community. Last but not least, remittances can work as an investment in case they foster economic activities. The typical case is the construction of a house. But in our research, there is also a unit that studies remittances that foster economic enterprises. So remittances are used to create business activities. The unit of Parma will say something about this possible meaning of remittances. Another important point is that remittances convey money, but not only money. Historically, remittances have also carried out new social attitudes, new political ideas, new values, new norms, new social practices. For instance, in recent decades, new ideas about the role of women, new ideas about the function of the fathers in families, new values concerning education of children. So remittances as works conducted by Peggy Levitt first, by Carling second, by other scholars, and in Italy by my colleague Paolo Boccagni, have displayed a particular glance about the social meaning of remittances, what remittances can do to transform sending societies. Last but not least, remittances can flow also in the opposite direction. There are remittances coming from the homeland to the migrants. The first is money lent to migrants to fund their departure, or, as I already said, the care for relatives provided by people who remain in the homeland and take care of children or parents of immigrants. And also, relatives in the homeland can send gifts to migrants to express the continuity of bonds. So even if we have studied the remittances from the side of migrants, the traditional remittances, we are very conscious of the fact that remittances are a complex network that can express love and affection between migrants and their families and their communities, going in different directions. So thank you, and thank you to my colleagues who will present some aspects of our study. Thank you.
Mille grazie, Maurizio. Thank you so much. I would like to start immediately with our first speaker, who is Dilip Ratha, and I just hand over to you, Dilip. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Happy New Year. Well, sitting in Washington, D.C., I think it's a special day today. It's really a new year. I want to first cite some data, remittances to low and middle income countries as defined by the World Bank. Really important to clarify that the low and middle income countries are defined according to income groups by the World Bank, and roughly $10,000 kind of per capita in like prices of 5 years ago or something. That would be roughly the order of magnitude, or maybe $12,000 or something is the maximum. That's above that are high income countries. So Poland would be high income country. And below that, Mexico would be one of the top high-level country, and then India in the middle, and then Nepal and others in the bottom. I say that because every year the list of low and middle-income countries is shrinking, and yet the volume of remittances flowing to these countries is rising. So 2024, we put out a blog with new data on remittances. And the Migration and Development Brief series that I used to publish stopped with the number 40 issue. We used to publish it every 6 months. And the last issue of Migration and Development Brief was in June 2024. The latest data we published in December on the International Migrants Day on December 18 through a blog, the People Move blog. And so you can read that. There are 2 blogs there. One about what happened in 2024, and second one is about what to expect in 2025 and beyond. Remittance flows to low and middle income countries reached $685 billion. That's the official data, officially recorded data. The true size is more likely $1 trillion. Compare that with foreign direct investment, about 380 billion. Compare that with official development assistance, about 250, 260 billion at the most. So remittances now are larger than both foreign direct investment and official development assistance combined. The largest recipient country was India, which a few years ago became the first country to receive more than $100 billion in remittances. And 2024, we estimate that India's remittances would be about $129 billion. So the data you cited, Professor Hillman, we have new charts that you can look up from the blog. India is the largest recipient with 129 billion, followed by Mexico, 69 billion, then Philippines, and then China, Egypt. These are the large recipients. And then you have countries that are smaller, where remittances are over 40% of GDP. For example, in Tajikistan, remittances are about 45% of GDP. And Nepal would be 25% or something. So there are a whole lot of small countries, poor countries, and conflict-laden countries where remittances tend to be the main source of external financing and really a financial lifeline to these countries. I don't want to go into the growth rates last year, but Latin America has tended to grow faster than other regions. ECA region, Europe and Central Asia region, has experienced a slower growth or even a reduction. So there are three factors at play. One is that the labor market in the destination country where the migrants are living, that is the most important determinant of remittances going back to the countries of origin. So in the United States, the largest destination country for migrants and the largest source country for remittances, the labor market really is very strong for migrant workers. And you can see that in the data. Compared to the native-born workers, foreign-born workers, and in particular Hispanic workers, their performance in terms of employment level and wages also has been stronger post-COVID. But even before COVID, for about 10 years now, that has been increasing. And that is what is causing a lot of flows to Latin America in particular. A similar phenomenon is going on in Central Asia, where most of the flow goes to the north, which is Russia. And in the case of Russia, money flowing back to Central Asia, there is an additional effect in addition to Russia's economy, which is highly dependent on oil, as you know, oil price in particular. And what is happening there is that the additional dimension is the exchange rate effect of the ruble. If ruble depreciates against the dollar, then if you are expressing remittances in Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, in dollar terms, US dollar terms, if the ruble becomes weaker, then US dollar terms, remittances become weaker. So that is the second big factor. The third big pole for migrants and source of remittances is the GCC countries, the Gulf Cooperation countries, in particular the UAE and then and Saudi Arabia. But all those countries, their importance is growing over time, and in particular, GCC countries. Obviously, they are dependent on oil price movements, but they manage to smooth the flow of remittances and their own economies by using their fiscal reserves. So that's a very stable source of remittances to South Asia in particular, Southeast Asia, but increasingly for Africa. And a stylized fact that may surprise you is that in Africa, North Africa, it is true that 75% of migrants are in Europe. And that share is falling, by the way. But in sub-Saharan Africa, about 2/3 of migrants are within sub-Saharan Africa. So there's a lot of intra-regional flow. And the point that you mentioned, Professor Hillman, about the cost of remittances, the cost of sending money within Africa can be easily 8%, 12%, 30%. 30%. This is really, really important. When countries in Africa depend so much on remittances, the cost of remittances being so high basically drives people to informality and informal channels. And that is a problem. And the main reason and main solution because of that, for that would be to just say that small remittances are not money laundering. Small remittances are not money laundering. This is not going to happen in my lifetime, but we have to keep saying that. If it is not said that way, then cost of sending money will not go down. Okay, so what about the future this year? A couple of words. One is that, when you close the door at the border, just say that, I'm shutting the door, you can't come. It also means that people will not go back who are already inside. They will not go back because they know they can't come back. A door is always a door. So what that means is that return migration is not going to be as large. Forced deportations, yes, but until you throw me out, I'm not going back home. I'm not going to visit my family. I'm not going to go back twice a year. I'm going to stay here for 4 years or until things become clearer. So it is the stock of migrants today in this country, in the origin country, in the destination countries that send remittances, not the recent flow, not new migrants, which means that if return migrants stay on, so return migration falls, new migration also declines, but return migration decline is larger than new migration decline, the stock will grow, which means remittances will grow. And I think that is what brings a lot of persistence. I'm not worried that remittances will fall in 2025. They will go into informal channels. Now, good luck to the regulators who want to go after the drug money and all those bad things, because now they will have more of a chance for those bad guys, bad flow of money to hide under good people and good money. Horrible, horrible strategy there. And then thinking about what to do about this whole issue of leveraging remittances for development purposes. Because remittances are private money, you can't tax them. They will flow underground. The cost of administering a tax on remittances would be higher than the revenue you would get. It doesn't make sense to tax remittances. So what else can you do? And that is where I think the tool of using remittances as a leverage, as a collateral for bond financing is one mechanism where you can have predictable financing instrument to raise development financing for development purposes. Diaspora bonds would be another big thing, which is that people send money home, but they also save money in the US and in Germany and in Italy and in India and in Saudi Arabia. Migrants save money. That money is sitting in accounts, deposits that give you 0% interest rate. If the country of origin issues a bond offering 5% rate of return, quite likely people will buy these bonds. And that then becomes a bond financing mechanism, a generic bond financing mechanism that can finance many, many development projects. The diaspora saving estimates are in the range of $500 billion a year as well. And as we speak, there are now countries like Kenya, Bhutan, Mexico, Guatemala, Ghana, Senegal, Zimbabwe, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Georgia, Armenia. These are countries thinking about issuing diaspora bonds, or they're already doing it. Nigeria, I forgot Nigeria. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that insightful little speech. I enjoyed that very much. And I think it flows directly in what Deepali is going to tell us about informal flows and diaspora economic contributions. So Deepali, I hand over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Hillman, and also Professor Ambrosius for this invitation to speak. So my key message would be basically that diaspora populations are large. They contribute economically, as Dilip has also pointed out in his previous intervention. And we need to see how we can enhance these contributions as well and work with them. So the 3 questions I'll look at is basically, who are the migrants in diaspora we're talking about? According to IOM, there are about 281 million international migrants in 2020. Now, most of these migrants are the main cause of their movement is essentially economic contribution, how to enhance their economic potential and economic rationale. And as a result, they end up contributing to the countries they move to, and they also end up contributing to the countries from which they come. A third point to keep in mind is that this movement is north-south, but an equal amount of that movement is also south-south. And again, it shows this economic rationale because the movement in the south-south context is to economic growth poles, for instance, South Africa or Cote d'Ivoire in Africa or Brazil in Latin America. But always, or as Dilip mentioned, Russia and the Soviet ex-Soviet countries. So there's always this kind of rationale in that movement. And the third one is basically the movement is at all skill levels, high, medium, and low skilled. So then we come to the second question is, do migrants and diaspora contribute economically? And I remember when I joined IOM, this was one of the key questions that we were looking at. And there was a McKinsey report at that point in time that pointed out that essentially, even though migrants form 3.4% of global population, they contribute nearly 10% of global GDP. So just as a generic figure to put out. Now, the manner in which this contribution happens is through matching labor market shortages. It's through contributing to skills which are lacking in the markets that they move to. And for instance, the ILO has an estimation of 164 million migrant workers. And according to McKinsey's again, while we focus on high-skilled migrants, it's the low and medium-skilled migrants that contribute almost on par with the high-skilled migrants. But it's just that we never got down to looking at what those contributions are and in what manner. I think Dilip and also you, Professor Hillman, have dealt very well with the whole issue of remittances and how they are a direct contribution and go directly to the homes of migrant families and therefore contribute to that whole kind of meeting of basic needs and the meeting of the UN SDGs, so to speak. And if we go a little further from that, transferring those remittances leads to a contribution to the financial services system, to the financial system in general, but also usage of financial infrastructure. For instance, usage of the banking system, mobile money, payment systems, digital payment systems, all have over the last decade in particular contributed to financial inclusion and has also contributed to using higher financial products, for instance, taking of loans to sponsor consumer purchases or mortgages to kickstart their real estate purchases in the home country, and so on and so forth. A fourth area is basically investment, trade, and entrepreneurship. And this happens at a small scale level, but also at a large scale level. So at the small scale level, it could be something as simple as a migrant or diaspora sending money to their father in a village, $500, and saying, invest this in setting up a grocery shop in the village. Or it could be at a much larger scale, where you have, for instance, the success stories of the Indian IT industry. You have the Chinese manufacturing industry, the manufacturing sector in Mexico, and also the health sector in the Philippines. So we could go on and on. There's enough data and literature and written about each of these four channels, basically. So it's like the facts are out there already. How can this be enhanced? Again, I think the first step would be to look at what are we talking about? I mean, how well do you know, in private sector terms, how well do you know your client? And I say this because before I joined IOM again, we worked on a paper on high net worth individuals, comparing Singapore and Switzerland. And I remember when we started that work, we spoke with some of the financial institutions, and the level of detail they had on high net worth individuals was amazing. Where they go, how much they pay, what their preferences are, leisure preferences are, everything. And I thought when I joined IOM, if we had only 5% of that information, you would be able to take certain economic or migrant economic products directly to the migrants if you have that kind of information. So data is crucial. And the second area that I would also suggest is, we again talked a lot about different manners and ways in which diaspora and migrant economic contribution can be enhanced. Dilip mentioned diaspora bonds, there are skills partnerships, there are insurance, there's portability of pension, there's a whole range of different things. But I think a key factor would be now moving from discussion or looking at what has worked to scaling up, enhancing, and working home and host country governments, private sector, bringing everybody together to have workable solutions which are implemented. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deepali, for your contribution and for that you say that the facts are out there. We have a request in the chat, and I already answered. We will make available all sorts of documentation and publications on our website soon next week, so that you can go back to the contributions of Dilip and recommendations for reading, for example, as Deepali, you said. Thank you so much. I hand over to the next speaker, which is Paddy, Siyanga, Knudsen. Please, you have the floor. I stop here.
Thank you, Felicitas, and thank you for everyone. Very interesting insights to learn from Deepali and also from Dilip. Felicitas, just being in this space reminds me, and listening also to the opening that you have provided, and also Maurizio's, of a question when we gathered in 2023. It was in June of 2023 in Nairobi. So all the industry players from the remittances world, from fintechs, diaspora organizations, governments, central banks, represented by central banks, ministries of finance, but then also a lot of other players convened by the United Nations, and in really trying to find questions and answers around remittances and also investment. So it was the Global Remittances Forum that IFAD, together with other bodies within the UN system, put together. And I went around, and I think, Dilip, I don't know if you remember this, just going around in this very specialized space, asking people, what is remittances in your mother tongue? So that's the question that I always pause when we have to talk about this, and I give this back to the audience to think about it, and maybe we can populate the chat a little bit. So what is the meaning, or is there a word for remittances in your mother tongue? Why do I take it to mother tongue? A bit closer to what Maurizio talked about. Because when we try to break down what remittances mean, it means many things to different people. And therefore, the focus on people begins to be very critical when we talk about remittances. We also cannot talk about remittances if we didn't talk about migrants and diaspora. And that's regardless of their migration status. And then, of course, in using any kind of tool to remit, their migration status is taken into consideration. And here, this is where we talk about principally on the KYC requirements that Dilip has also alluded to at some point. So for me, I think when we talk about remittances, it's talking about migration governance. And so we cannot detach them. So all the issues that have to do with the disposable income, because this is essentially what we're talking about. If you and me here in our different rooms, and assuming we're all doing some kind of work, can make a decision about what we do with our disposable income. Do we stop by and buy a cup of coffee? Do we spend it on our holidays? Do we spend it on a new career direction? Do we spend it on extending our house or building our roof? This is what migrants spend their time doing, except they're making much more bolder decisions. They are co-financing two lives in two different spaces, something that many people are not able to do. They're paying school fees beyond their nuclear family members. And so they're making all these decisions. So there's a lot of personal strategy that go into it. We almost have to be social workers to understand remittance strategies and what that means in the space of public policy, providing the space for migrants to be able to support their families, the so-called personal SDGs. And so focus maybe back on Africa when we talk about a balanced narrative, when we talk about remittances, I think is very important. And here, it took me back to a publication that I put together with under Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, where we're talking about the growing market on remittances. So it was a growing remittances industry, and for me, I was a bit. I felt like we needed to first approach me to do this work, and it was a very interesting piece of work that picks from many experts within the area, not just from data, but also talking about diaspora actors and how they have seen it. But I think many of us talk about remittances in different spaces. So some of the things that pop out when we think about Africa, and given the time that I have, is that there are a lot of changing trends. So remittance strategies of my mother who migrated with very different ambitions are very different from me and my sister who's 10 years younger than me. So remittance strategies are indeed different. Something happened, for instance, during a time like COVID. COVID showed us that remittances could be digital, but also COVID showed us on the same side that handheld remittances became stuck in different parts of the world. So they managed to highlight these two different spaces. The digital doesn't work for everybody, and there's still some restrictions, particularly for migrants that we're still doing handheld remittances, and those will be many that are undocumented, and those that really felt challenged by high costs, which is something that we've talked about. And then also a little bit to zoom on Africa, what was really interesting is this gray area, and you talk about it in different spaces. There's this gray area of remittances and micro investments. Because like we said, I could buy a cup of coffee and somebody else is thinking about maybe extending a piggery farm where they're coming from, or supporting social entrepreneurship or a social project around their former school. So many aspects that could go. Do we call this remittances? Is this micro investments? Where is this sitting? So there are these kind of gray areas that we can see. But at the same time, I'm reminded, that we therefore need to understand a lot about the information behind data. So whether we're analyzing formal remittance and looking at numbers that central banks give at the end of the year, they want to show us the big figures around remittances, because these days we all want to see what remittances are going into our countries, particularly countries of origin, and particularly countries in the global south. There's a lot of attention on that, but you don't see much. So for instance, when the King of Denmark is giving the address at the end of the year, the King of Denmark is not talking about the remittances that the Danes bring into the society, because it has a different meaning and space there, and probably has a different message in his New Year message. But that's an important message for somebody like me coming from Zambia, where the president will talk directly to its diaspora and not just talk about the contributions that we make where we are, but also talk about remittances. So it is important in terms of public policy in African countries. But at the same time, I think what we need to understand is that there's also some intricate details. So some studies have shown, for instance, transit countries, and we're beginning to see a growth of remittances due to migration trends. So we're talking, for instance, Morocco, Mali, Niger. We can also talk about Egypt and Tanzania. But when we look at kind of top remitting countries in Africa in terms of in US dollar form, it's Nigeria, it's Ghana, it's Kenya, it's Zimbabwe. But all these other transit countries are also important. And there's something there that we kind of need to pay a bit of attention to. And so microdata also becomes very important. Where does microdata come from? Diaspora organizations, migrant groups, and all that becomes very important as we investigate to understand the people behind the industry. And so one of the things that we always talk about from the African Non-State Actors Platform, we really try to put across different recommendations, different thoughts, how we think about how diaspora should engage within the space of migration governance. And when we think about remittances, one of the things that we see is that we need, and this could both actually very much apply also for policymakers that work with African governments, in that we need to look at partnerships within African actors. So which are those partnerships that are there that can really be effective in understanding the people behind the remittance industries, but what is also impacting them, instead of just the current obsession that we have about reducing cost. My question is, if we do reduce the cost, where does that extra disposable income go? Will it go into the hands of those who are sitting in the industry? Or will this disposable income indeed remain with the 1 billion people that rely on these remittances in their different countries? And so that is particularly important. But I think when we think about, for instance, this very balanced narrative, and I think that for me is what opens up our mind, that it's not just an obsession around the cost, it's also our obsession should be about how do we provide much more decent work, because it's all about disposable income. Once again, that ends up being remittances. How do we provide decent work? How do policymakers look at regularization, for instance, because that's one of the spaces in which we have decent work? How do we look at better matching of jobs and skills? That we see in global north countries, where we almost have brain waste because we have PhD holders being Uber drivers instead of being able to attract the kind of jobs that they're supposed to be able to attract given their qualifications. So how do we deal with some of these things that are sitting behind migration governance and are really going to be a good mirror and reflection into some of the changes that we see in the remittances space. But then also beyond understanding these personal strategies, we know that labor migration has continued. We see many countries continue to sign bilateral labor agreements. We also know that migration is moving south-south, and of course, intra-regionally, very important within Africa. We have seen that. And so how do we focus a little bit more on the intra-regional? Knowing about remittances markets within the intra-region. We know, for instance, in Africa, some of those corridors are some of the most expensive remittance sending corridors, and some of them are sitting right next to each other: Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, Tanzania. And so how do we reduce some of these? So looking at intra-regional corridors and how we reduce costs. What is sitting inside these corridors that is restrictive for regulatory side of things? At the same time, there's a small highlight, and I will end in a minute, is the focus on women. Because we have seen that there is an increase well, one would also say, for those who are working on women and migration, would say it's just numbers that were not depicted in the past. Yes, there are more women on the move, and therefore there is an impact. So what are women's remittances strategy? How can that change? How can that reshape development? How can that shape, look at issues around financial inclusion as well? How do we include this as we try to investigate the people behind the remittances industry? And how do we really support so that we can see this disposable income, migrants and diaspora continue to want to send home for those who have that interest? But how does it go beyond real estate, social sector support in terms of education, in terms of supporting health, but really going into local economic development, so that people go beyond, go into using remittances as a way, and also the bridge to the other savings that Dilip talked about. There's a big tap there that's sitting with migrants and particularly diaspora, their savings sitting in bank accounts, and that should cross over. That could really be the kind of financing that we're looking for in terms of development in countries of origin. I'll end here to give a chance for others to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paddy. That was also excellent. Both insights, Deepali and Paddy, are very helpful for us to understand. I especially like the point about who is behind the numbers, and Deepali said so also. So I think we will speak about that in the discussion. So the facts are out there. That's what Deepali said. I would like to hand over to our Italian colleagues here. We now start we listen to of the making of Baglioni and Dr. Molinari, and I just ask you to enter to take the floor. Thanks.
Thank you, Felicitas. I'll share the screen as we have a presentation. Here we go. Yep. Okay, so thank you, Felicitas and Maurizio, for this invitation. Yeah, as you said, I'm sharing the presentation with my colleague Maria Molinari, who is here beside me. And we are part of the research that Maurizio mentioned before, the Migrants, and we are researching and studying how remittances are used to create business opportunities, entrepreneurship in the country of origin. We do so sorry, I need to reduce this. Here we go. Yeah. No, is this one. Yeah. We do so because, contrary to what Felicitas said before, that the criticism to remittances as instrument that might create dependencies or somehow artificial development in the countries of origins, we know that there are remittances that do create proper opportunities for economic development, and not only for economic development. So we do study in the team that is based here in Parma how remittances are used to create opportunities for the establishment of new entrepreneurial activities. And studying remittances in connection with entrepreneurship is a way to understand not only, let's say, the elements that are related with economic development of remittances, but also the less tangible, let's say, aspects that are related with remittances. Maurizio mentioned before social remittances, cognitive remittances, so the way knowledge, competencies, skills acquired while working, for example, in our case, in Italy, in Parma, where we are used to develop economic and entrepreneurial opportunities in the country of origins, and obviously how there's a transfer of knowledge across countries, and we are into a more proper, let's say, transnational dimension, as Maria will illustrate now. Just a word, why do we study we study the Sri Lankan community? I didn't mention that, so we do so by looking at the case study. We look at the Sri Lankan communities because it's one of the most important communities based here in Parma and providing important, actually, workforce and competencies to keep alive the Parma hemp production district, which is, as you perhaps know, one of the key drivers of our economy. And so we look into this well-established and settled community here and how they're being established here, their life here, their knowledge here, is used to provide opportunities for their own families, for relatives, for their own villages in the country of origins, and how this transfer back then again here. I'll pass the floor to Maria for the rest of the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Simone. I'm presenting our research methodology. We conducted 11 interviews so far because it's a work in progress. So, and some interview were done with the assistance of Sinhalese interpreter. Our research is a research multi-site ethnographic research, and the main field work is conducted in 4 villages, a small town, as Simone told you before. So the next field work is scheduled for February, next February, in Sri Lanka, following a family of migrants returning to their country of origin. And also, yeah, our method of analysis is about transcription of interviews and manual analysis through the identification of key interpretative themes, followed by group discussion within the research team. So we follow up some element of interest. Remittances as an opportunity to nurture multiple professional identity in a transnational space. Is the interesting is the dual professional identity intersect with the migrant dual status. So worker in Italy, but in the same time, entrepreneur in Sri Lanka, because we know people that they are in constant and daily communication with employees in Sri Lanka. They coordinate work with utilizing digital tools and remote control systems, so to manage material and order and resolve problem with the workers there in Sri Lanka. For example, WhatsApp and video calls and so on. Development of diversified entrepreneurial activities in the country of origin involve managing multiple ventures simultaneously. That I think is interesting. But contrary to extant literature, in our case, starting a business is not necessarily driven by the prospect of return, but by the desire to maintain greater opportunity in case of future difficulties in either country of belonging. So entrepreneurial activity occurs as a form of guarantee and protection against the risk that are part of the migration project. So rootedness and transnationalism in this case coexist. So in the individual operating business in Sri Lanka demonstrates significant sign of rootedness in Italy. For example, they maintain jobs in Italy, purchased a home, and their children grew up here in Italy, and they possess extensive social network in Italy, but in Sri Lanka too. So another interesting aspect that we think is cultural remittances, in particular the position between strength of difference and strength of similarity, because in Italy the opportunity arise from cultural differences. So for example, Sri Lankan catering, Sri Lankan restaurant. Then we,
Sorry.
oh, so is addressed to Sri Lankan community, but also to Italians. And in the same time, in Sri Lanka, the opportunities are found in a district where many people have immigrated to Italy. For example, I'm thinking about Venapua in Puttalam district, known as Little Italy. The opportunity are based on lifestyle and taste acquired in Italy. So the business concept is founded on social and cultural remittances accumulated over years of immigration in Italy. Just to do an example, we show you the experience of Sandun that you see in the picture. So in addition to resources acquired in host country, of course, material and financial remittances, cognitive remittances are crucial. The story of Sandun is interesting for us because he learned how to running a farm here in Parma. And he learned how to do mozzarella cheese, and then he went back to Sri Lanka and transferred this knowledge to his employees that they work with mozzarella cheese. They produce with success mozzarella, and also that is an interesting case with about the transfer of knowledge and of business that live on based on cultural remittances. And okay, to conclude, remittances for investment are a prism to understand the different dimension of migrant transnational life in their capacity to transfer knowledge, competence, skill, personal and professional relation across countries, a strategy to mitigate migration risk and increasing chances of success. I hope to be on time.
Thank you so much. I think we are all somehow enchanted by the mozzarella transfer. I think that's a very new point for me. We are already running a bit out of time, and we want to have a bit of time for discussion also. So I would like to ask Brunella Casalini to take the floor. Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon to all those attending the seminar, and I would like also to express my gratitude to the organizer for this event for the kind invitation. Allow me to commence by providing some context. The presentation I'm about to deliver is part of the work on collective remittances carried out by the research group of the University of Florence within the 2020 National Research Project Migrants. The research was conducted through in-depth interviews with Ukrainian migrants in Tuscany, specifically those involved in religious communities and formal and informal secular association. Since the war broke out, the Ukrainian migrant community in Italy has mobilized to help by sending remittances. These remittances were not limited to individual transfer to family members in Ukraine. They also took the form of collective effort to address the urgent needs of Ukrainian population affected by the Russian attacks. It is notable that many of the actors who mobilized quickly had previous experience in collective action, particularly following the Maidan Square Revolution between 2013 and 2014. The earlier mobilization tied also to the Russian occupation of Crimea and the hybrid war in Donbass was a pivotal moment for the Ukrainian migrant community in Italy. The interviews conducted in Tuscany revealed that 2014 marked a significant turning point for this community. During this period, there was an increase in associative activity that led to the emergence of collective remittances. At the same time, Ukrainians in Italy intensified their cultural and political effort to reconstruct and mobilize historical memory and advocate for the truth about the conflict. This activity reflects what can be seen as a transformation of part of the migrant community into a diaspora. The term diaspora, as employed herein, is understood in the sense delineated by Adamson and Amiot, who define it not as the aggregate of the migrant population of all individuals of Ukrainian origin residing abroad, but rather as the segment willing to organize and advocate on behalf of their country of origin, engaging in humanitarian, cultural, and political action towards the homeland. This phenomenon is distinct in Italy from that observed in countries with a longer history of Ukrainian migration, such as Canada and the United States of America, where Ukrainian migration began in the late 19th century. By contrast, Ukrainian migration to Italy is relatively recent, commencing in the 1990s following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Before 2014, this migration has been primarily economic in nature, with a significant presence of women employed in the domestic care sector. According to the data compiled by the Directorate General of Immigration and Integration Policies of the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy in 2022, the percentage of Ukrainian women residing in Italy as of 1st January 2022 was 79% of the total population, around 230,000 people. The mobilization of the Ukrainian diaspora in Italy, as reconstructed through the interviews, suggests that monetary transfers at a collective level are only possible when accompanied by social, political, and cultural transfers. For a country at war, this requires effort in identity and memory construction. In this context, in a sense, we can speak of social remittances that are political, cultural in nature, and deal with the preservation of memory and identity. The concept of social remittances has been applied in the last 30 years to various aspects of religious, political, and cultural kind. As Peggy Levitt explained, social remittances involve transnational, multi-situated, and multi-scalar social fields. These fields go beyond the connection between a specific sending and receiving community. They are influenced by and in turn influence subnational, national, and supranational levels. To illustrate this point, consider the case of Ukrainian migrant community in Tuscany. Since 2014, and particularly following February 2022, collective social remittances have circulated not only between Italy and Ukraine, but also through transnational associations such as the Ukrainian World Congress. These organizations, representing millions of Ukrainians worldwide, support associations such as Italia Ucraina Maidan and ILEA, which adopt shared strategies, materials, and symbols. The commemoration of the Holodomor can be cited as a salient example of this dynamic. Now, to conclude, I would like to summarize some of our findings. Since 2014, the Ukrainian diaspora in Italy has been operating on multiple levels. These levels include the defense of truth regarding the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, the combating of fake news, the preservation of culture, and the protection of historical memory. Moreover, the diaspora has been actively involved in combating urban destruction, or the so-called urbicide, which, as defined by Martin Coward's seminal work, constitute a direct attack on the historical memory and identity of a community, irrespective of its military and strategic significance. In particular, we have seen how the Ukrainian diaspora uses historical memory and remittances, both emergency and economic remittances, to contribute to the reconstruction of Ukraine's social and urban fabric. The analysis of all these cultural, political, and economic transfer is also interesting because it reveals the internal pluralism of the diaspora. Even during a war, different notions of home and nation shape different contributions. For example, some migrants may oppose the war refraining from sending military aid, but support the rebuilding of schools and hospitals. Others may send emergency supplies, while some may provide funds for military purposes. Thus, in some cases, remittances are motivated by nationalism, while in other cases, it is more appropriate to speak of solidarity with those currently resisting Russian aggression. In any case, collective economic remittances are only a small part of the wider range of activities and social transfers in which the Ukrainian diaspora in Italy is engaged today, seeking to protect and care for its identity and that of its homeland in this critical moment in history. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to call for the next speaker, who is Dr. Valentina Marconi, and she will speak about fiction, ideal, and heuristic on the YouTube channel of Western Union. And I think it's very important, and we heard this also from Simone, that we focus more on the role of technologies, on digital tools, on artificial intelligence, and also on what we heard now from Brunella on fake news, which are distributed via social media. Or let's say it like this, we cannot avoid speaking about it. So I want to give the floor to Valentina now. Please, Valentina.
Thanks. My name is Valentina Marconi. Thanks for the invitation. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Trento. And I'm going to speak today about a project, a research we have done, always in the framework of Migrants at the University of Trento. The research was done by Professor Paolo Boccagni, Dr. Alberto Brodesco, and myself, and it focuses on Western Union, and in particular on representations of transnational migrant life and remittance practices by Western Union. For this research, we analyzed 800 advertising videos archived on the YouTube channel of Western Union. These videos, this advertising, were produced between 2015 and 2023, and they were produced for different media, TV or social media platform like Facebook, Instagram. Given the fact that, as other speakers have outlined, millions of people live abroad as migrants, and each year hundreds of billions in US dollar are sent globally as remittances, it is unsurprising that there is a big market for global players like Western Union in the remittance industry. These companies need, of course, to reach their customers, and they need to do so through advertising. So our question was really, how would this company, and in particular Western Union in our case, visually represent these transactions, which are actually deeply intimate and embedded in family dynamics? And what we found out through the analysis of the videos is, on the one hand, the company has created a very coherent, positive, alternative narrative on international migration that is reassuring, uplifting, inspiring, and far more benign than other narratives that nowadays circulate in the public sphere. This narrative is based on a beautified and standardized account of transnational migration and migrants. This part was to a certain extent expected for us because it is a marketing product at the end of the day. However, what we found interesting is to what extent the narratives portrayed in these videos, and we particularly focus on a subset of videos which focus on moments of transnational family life, and in particular on the act of sending remittances. So we found very interesting how, to what extent these videos resonated with the real life experiences of migrants, in particular in two aspects. The first one, for the fact that these videos portray remittances not just as abstract exchanges of money, but as very ordinary, routinary form of mutual support, which are embedded in the moral codes of transnational families. And the second point, how these videos portray the form of co-presence at distance that the exchange of remittances foster within transnational families. Most of these videos are organized through a film technique called split screen, which means that the screen is divided in two parts by a vertical line. On one hand of the screen, there is the sender. On the other hand, there is the receiver. And the moment in which the transaction is made, for visualizing this exchange of money, the company basically has decided to use an object which moves from one part to the screen to the other, or an act of care that, for example, the sender performs toward the receiver. And we found very interesting that this object which moves, or this action that is performed, momentarily interrupt the binarism between these two sides of the screen. But at the same time, sender and receiver, migrant and non-migrant, these two persons of the same family, never look at each other in the eyes nor touch each other. So we found really interesting how the company has, first of all, shaped narratives that show the virtual co-presence is not just about ICTs, but it's also about shared objects and shared family routines. So things which are really embedded in the moral economy of the specific family, but also how by for example, the absence of mutual eye work, there is a representation of the structural constraints of virtual co-presence that is not, in any case, fungible with physical co-presence. So just to conclude, it was interesting for us to see how this advertising material, which is interestingly also under-researched, portrays both ideal and fictional accounts that at the same time contain some element of analytical value. And just to conclude with maybe a suggestion of a larger significance, this was also prompted the reflection about to what extent contribution of migration by arts and humanities can also help us as social scientists in understanding more the social phenomena that we study. I think I will stop here, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Valentina. I was just wondering, it would have been wonderful to see some pictures. But this object, this item you mean, which travels on the screen between the two split screens, what is it? Money? Which symbol is used here? What is it?
It depends on the single advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, for example, is a family pet, which run from one side of the screen to the other. So from the house.
A cat or a dog or what?
Yes, a dog, for example, but it could be also a mug, which is at the beginning position on the table of the sender, and then the receiver take the mug and position it on his or her table. Or
it wouldn't be, frankly, a bunch of US dollars or so.
No, it's never money. So
it's okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, but anyway, we want to save some time for discussion, and we still have one speaker. Lekh, I just want to hand over the mic to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to thank Professor Felicitas Hillman for providing me this opportunity. And I will speak today on the basis of my PhD project, which was financialization of remittances at the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. And I used the data, a mixed data, a quantitative data from National Bank, World Bank, and then expert interviews, observations, and more anthropological work. So I, in some ways, combine these both data to interpret the financial phenomena of financialization of remittances. First, I present global context of emergence of financialization of remittances and the map the major elements. So to say it's basically to say how I perceive the phenomena of financialization of remittances, what I mean by that. Second, I begin with discussing a bit of historical context and shed some light on manifestations of financialization of remittances in the context of Nepal. And then finally, I would conclude with the implications of financialization of remittance project and their success and failures and broader implication to the society. So these are three major structures that I would like to speak on today. For me, the financialization of remittance has emerged against the background of broader shift from earlier paradigm referred to as remittance development model, basically remittance-based development model, remittance to development assemblage, or global remittance trend. Amid the global financial crisis, persistent stagnation in the level of official development aid, the financial inclusion of the migrant worker was promoted by international development community to search for innovative financing mechanism, as Dilip Ratha says. So two key initiatives were involved in the emergence of financialization of remittances. First, the G8 Summit 2009 that proposed making financial services more accessible to migrant and their remittance receivers as a means of effectively reducing poverty. So remittances were directly connected to the Reducing Poverty Project. And then second, the Global Partnership on Financial Inclusion, funded again by G20 member countries during the Seoul Summit in 2010, presented remittance as important pathway to financial inclusion. So to measure the progress on this objective, G20 established the plan to facilitate remittance flows, which monitors, compares, and achievement of the different countries in their attempt to harness the developmental effect of linking financial inclusion with remittances. So this new phenomena, therefore, is comprised of four major elements for me. The first is formalization of remittances. The financialization of remittance is based on the idea that it is more efficient to maximize the developmental effect of remittances and to shape remitting behavior to promote more productive investment of remittances, that is, firstly, to send them through formal channels. So within the formalization of remittances become increasingly attached to their broader integration to finance. Formalization doesn't mean just a formalization, but it also means bringing it to the former global financial circuits. This represents a key shift in understanding of remittances through financial logics in the productive investment has become understood as an investment in financial services and products, which is supposed to promote development. So, and then second, the financialization of remittances considers technological innovations, digitalization as a key strategies to increase the developmental effect of the remittances by reducing the cost. So technological digital tools, especially targeting migrants and their families, are considered to reduce the cost, formalize sending, and bring financial inclusion. So it was a triple aim. The third element consists of securitization of remittances, as Dilip Ratha says. Again, securitization is presented as an innovative tool for developing countries to raise development funding, provide stability, reliability, even in the times of crisis. The emphasis on securitization is very regional specific. It's more of the Latin American phenomena than used in any other part of the world. So the fourth fundamental pillar of the financialization is linking of the remittances to financial inclusion and financial education project, which each embedded within the broader global policy agenda. Now, with this, I would like to shift my attention from global phenomena to its manifestation in the context of Nepal. So I broadly highlight the financialization of remittances in Nepal in two dimensions. One from the top and from the grassroots. So there are these, like from the macroeconomic efforts, from the top is formalization agenda. What are the efforts? The incentives of remittance account, remit accounts, banking, bank accounts, and so on and so forth. And then second is investment instruments, products and services like remit bonds, as Ratha already spoke, remit hydros, specifically targeting hydro, like raising investment for hydroelectric projects in Nepal, and promotion of IPOs among migration. So these were three products that were launched. And then the third dimension of top-down macroeconomic was digitization and remittance discoveries and promotion of the remittance technologies. So, and then the other element, other dimension of the financialization of remittance is financializing from the bottom, from the grassroots, basically, through development strategy and projects, such as financial inclusion, financial literacy, pre-departure trainings, including financial literacy, financial education components in the pre-departure training, making having bank account essential for the migration, basically, and enterprise building, value chain building, the projects by IFAD, such as rural enterprises and remittance project, which are supposed to build a value chain, build an ecosystem of remittance and small and medium enterprises and so on and so forth. And then the media advertises and media campaigning, basically a public pedagogy through which the whole the financialization has been worked out. The remittances are not only brought into formal channels, circuits through the top and grassroots efforts, they also have become an instrument of financialization of economy and society in the country. So by doing this too, it's not only remittances are brought into financial circuits, but also remittance have become instrument through which society is being financialized, basically. So through which the financial instruments, through which banking, the financial sectors, financial markets, actors are pushed to the society. That's one. Now here, I would like to historicize a bit because my research was looking at remittances from 1900 to 2020, so almost a century. So I would like to historicize a bit, whether it is the new phenomena or it was there already discussed in a while. And we have this academic amnesia where we forgot the issues which were discussed. So here I would like to begin with a quote from a veteran government official who led the debt survey team in 1940s that recommended the establishment of formal financial institutions for credit supply in the rural areas of Nepal. So he states, the huge inflows of money, which is remittances, if they had been invested properly, it could have contributed to building a strong national economy, yet we missed the opportunity to be a wealthy nation. If these large inflows of money, remittances, were used to promote local industries, it could have increased production, improved quality of products, and Nepali would have been a wealthy nation. Instead, they contributed to flooding of rural villages with the foreign goods, disrupting local industries, inflating prices, and deflating the local currency. So this was said in 1972 for the beginning, especially for 1920s. So this was observed in 1920s in the context of Nepal. He's bemoaning the failure and improper use of remittances, which could have contributed to the growth of local industries between 1920 and 1950s. Further, he laments the conspicuous consumption, deindustrialization of traditional industries, and negative cultural impacts of remittances. His complaints can be better understood if they are read in their historical contexts. And it was at this point, enormous remittance flowed into rural Nepal, disrupting reconfiguration of local industries, currency regimes, credit and debt relations, labor and property relations, social hierarchies, thus laying the groundwork for the introduction of formal financial institutions in the context of Nepal. So remittances were the tool which basically laid a foundation for the formal financial institutions from the very beginning, almost a century ago. As such, these colonial encounters shape Nepal's position in global division of labor that continues to be reproduced through remittances and cycles of migrations. In a report, again in 1980, talking about 1970s, immigration, remittance, and rural development, Kongsaka refers to inflows from Indian territories during 1960s. Remittances are lifeline of households and rural economy in Nepal. These flows have great potential to contribute to rural development if they are properly directed toward investment through appropriate and efficient policy interventions. More importantly, they encourage financial activities in the rural areas. It's again about 1970s. And written, the report was published in 1982. As with this first, the code, this claims echoes the nervousness of the elite actors on the use of remittance in the context of Nepal. The suggestion is embedded in both state-led agenda under the rubric of economic modernization and the prescription of international financial institutions and bilateral development agencies. In the financial sector, the deepening and broadening of financial infrastructure for credit supply into rural areas, the monetization of economy, and the formation of national capital were all characterized as an essential part of economic modernization. During this period, remittances continued to be key source of foreign exchange and household income in the rural areas. For more importantly, they provide a source of deposit for financial institutions, which helped extend and sustain financial infrastructures in rural areas. However, remittance in cash were considered as a challenge for monetization in the sense of an expanding reach of Nepali currency, because then the cash inflow was the Indian currency. And around 1985, the famous infamous structural adjustment program prescribed by the international financial institutions and by the bilateral development agencies stationed in Kathmandu started to manifest in the country's political and economic policies. This started the country on the path to liberalization, privatization, and marketization in the financial sector, while simultaneously liberalizing immigration policies through the Labor Act of 1985. So the liberalization of economy as well as liberalization of passport coincides around 1985 in the context of Nepal. In order to grasp the magnitude and importance of remittance in Nepal for the current situation, it's worth examining some of the macroeconomic data on the subject. As in 2023, almost 26% of the GDP, almost $10 billion are remittances. And this statistics does not include remittances from informal channels and India. So which might constitute almost 50% of that if we include the informal channels and the remittances from India. In this context, harnessing remittance for macroeconomic stability and productivity investment became a new development mantra in Nepal between 2000 and 2015. The promotion of remittances transfer through formal channels, the positive role of remittance to GDP growth output, have stimulating private consumptions, were the few things that has to be considered. So now I would like to more go into my conclusive analysis rather than
very, very shortly, please, because you're already running out of time. Not less than a minute.
Sure.
Not more than a minute, excuse me.
Sure. So the financial, basically the outputs are, one we could see is the failure of these projects by IFAD and so on and so forth to spur their entrepreneurship. So less than 2% is capitalized and less than 1% of the initiatives, the entrepreneurial initiatives have been successful in the context of Nepal. And then the second would be It also shows that very prominent linkages of these extension of the financial market, despite the failure of the entrepreneurial projects and the other projects. The extension of the financial institutions and formal finance is one of the success in the context of Nepal. Third, digitization is also considered as a success in the context of financialization outputs. So finally, the constitution of this rational utility maximizing agent has been a failure in the context of Nepal, but the financial awareness of the financial instruments and so on and so forth is one of the major success in the context of Nepal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Lekh. Thank you for reminding us on the consumption side. I was mentioning this, so changing nutrition habits. Also, this is the case in many villages in Africa, for example. So we know that people start to eat things they think they are fancy and maybe not adapted to the local culture. And thank you for reminding us to this. And we have a little bit of time for discussion. I would say we now stop the recording.